Hello and welcome to the conversation. I am your host, Nando Vila, and I'm very excited to be here today because we have two excellent guests for you, starting with Mark Rank. Mark is a professor of social welfare at Washington University and the author of Poorly Understood. Mark is one of the foremost experts on poverty in America, inequality, and social justice. Very excited to talk to him because I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of political noise, and it just seems like the biggest issue that we face, which is probably poverty, is very under discussed. Mark.
Oh, for sure, and in fact, that's one of the reasons why we wrote the book. Is that it's such a critical issue. It seems to underlie so many things that we're concerned about in society, and so. So that was kind of the idea behind writing the book.
And how many poor people are there in America? I mean, I saw that your research shows that for the first time ever, a majority of Americans will experience poverty at some point in their life. But how many people are technically poor in the United States?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It really kind of depends on how you define it. If we say how many people fell below the poverty line, the official poverty line in the United States, last year it was around 10.5% of the population, about 34 million people. But as you said, that's just one point in time. And a lot of my work is focused on what's the actual risk across the lifetime of experiencing poverty. And if we do that, we find that about 3/4 of Americans at some point will spend a year in poverty.
Mm. And this idea of the poverty line is always been kind of, I don't know, just a strange one to me. I mean, I guess you have to find some way to define it, but there's just some arbitrary line which says like if you earn $1 more than this, you are not poor. If you earn $1 less than this, you're not poor. But is the difference between that doesn't seem that meaningful to me. So like how does the poverty line, who decides what it is and what is it?
Well, it's a very technical question, and basically the idea is that if you fall below that line, you really don't have the income or the resources to purchase those things necessary kind of for a minimally adequate life. And so you don't have enough money for food, for shelter, these kinds of things. And I would say that the way that we calculate poverty officially in the United States is actually very, very conservative. That if you ask Americans where that line should be, it's actually much higher. In fact, it's often twice as high as the official poverty line. So a lot of folks are along the lines of what you're saying, that that the way we calculate poverty is very, very conservative.
And I live in Los Angeles, where obviously there's tons of really wealthy people, a lot of celebs. I see their houses, but there's also a ton of homeless people, desperately poor people, and then a lot of people you just see that are living like right on the edge. And it strikes me as it seems like one of these problems that is sold to the population is kind of intractable, like that there's no solution to it. But I don't know. There seems to be plenty of money to go around, at least where I'm sitting. What drives poverty, and how can we fix it?
Well, you're right that if we compare the United States with other countries, the United States has much higher rates of poverty than these other countries. And the question is, why is that? We have the resources. We're not a poor country. We have the resources to do something about that, but we don't. And one of the things that we focus on in the book is that in the United States, we really don't have the political will to address poverty. Now, why is that? One of the reasons is because of the way we look at the causes of poverty. We look at poverty often as an individual failing rather than as a structural failing. So if we look at poverty from a structural failing, we can say, look, we're not producing enough jobs that pay a decent wage. We're not producing jobs that have benefits. And so as you said in LA, you've got wide inequality. You've got people on both ends, But the folks in the middle, over the last 30 or 40 years, have really been suffering and have really become much more vulnerable. So as I said before, if we look across a period of time, we find that a majority of Americans will experience poverty.
Poverty in America getting worse?
It's actually, in some ways, it's kind of remained the same over a long period of time. So in any given year, between 10 and 15% of the population is in poverty. It tends to go up during worse economic times. It tends to come down a bit during better economic times, but it remains at that level. But if you compare the United States with other countries, our poverty rates tend to be about twice as high as many of these other countries.
Mm. And a lot of your work do with inequality. And I remember when Barack Obama said that inequality was the greatest challenge of our time. And the response to the sort of inequality discourse from a lot of people, especially on the right, is that why do you care about inequality? Like, it doesn't matter how rich the rich are as long as like kind of everyone else is getting rich. What's your view on that, on whether inequality is bad in and of itself, or kind of as long as you're, raising up the level of the poor, then there's no big deal with inequality?
Yeah, a couple things in terms of that. First of all, wide inequality actually has some pretty serious societal consequences. So if you look at the health of the society, the more inequality there is, the less healthy that society is on a number of different variables. So if you ask yourself, why does the United States have the highest rates of incarceration in the world? Why do we have some of these things? A lot of it has to do with inequality. And the other thing that I think is really important here is that the United States has always been about equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome. But the problem is when you have more and more inequality of outcome, wider income inequality, that affects equality of opportunity. And the simplest way to see that is just look at the school districts in any area in the United States. You find here in St. Louis, for example, in the suburban areas, some really great school districts. You go 20 minutes to the city and you find some school districts that are really struggling. And to say that there's equality of opportunity is just a joke. And so if we think about the core American values that everybody should have a chance to get ahead, that's no longer the case. And I think that's very troubling, whether you're on the left or on the right.
Yeah, because like one of the things people say, yeah, we may have more poor people in America, but that's because we allow more social mobility. You can rise up and anyone in America can become a millionaire if they get, if they work hard or if they get lucky or whatever. Is that really the case, or is that kind of a misconception?
It is a misconception. So the feeling for a long period of time was that, just as you said, there's, maybe inequality is not such a bad thing because people can move up and down. It turns out that the United States has much less economic mobility than in many of the other sort of high economy countries. And one of the reasons, imagine this, the rungs on the ladder in terms of the income distribution have been getting further apart, making it harder for people to climb up that ladder. And so that's one of the reasons why, we have much less economic mobility. The other thing that you see is that, we're famous for talking about rags to riches. And there's always some people that rise from rags to riches, but that's a very small minority of the cases. And so only about 5% of folks that are growing up in the bottom sort of 20% of the population actually make it to the top. So it's a very, very small percentage, and it's actually been getting smaller over the last 40 years.
If you had a meeting with President Joe Biden, new president, fresh, young President Joe Biden, if you had his ear and he would listen to you, what would you tell him to do to alleviate poverty?
Well, first of all, what I would say to him is that if you look, and this is something that I have focused on, if you look at what childhood poverty costs the United States economically, a conservative estimate is approximately $1 trillion a year. We spend a huge amount on the fallout of poverty rather than dealing at the front end of the problem. And so what I would say is, let's have some programs that provide decent paying jobs, which I think President Biden is very much attuned to, the idea of getting the minimum wage up to at least $15. Let's get some programs that invest in human potential and childhood sort of development. These are the kinds of things that for every dollar we spend on those kind of programs, we save $7 or $8 down the road. So that's the kind of thing I would be talking about. And I think that he is actually quite attuned to that.
All right, well, Mark, Professor, thank you so much. Really appreciate your work and your time here today. It's a fascinating discussion about, like you said, the most important issue that for some reason is kind of constantly ignored.
Well, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.